we're going to talk about what are called conversion factors, and conversion factors are very helpful in all sorts of areas. So called a conversion factor, which is really basically a fraction, right? It's basically a proportion, and it is something you multiply by in order to convert from one kind of unit to a second kind of unit, okay? And there are a couple things that will be very helpful to remember when you're using a conversion factor. First of all, you're actually keeping things the same. It doesn't seem like that. And you're also multiplying by 1, kind of. And I'll show you what that means. Okay? But it's really important. Remember units. It's all about the units. Okay? And what you call them. And finally, some of the steps are going to be very important. And usually, most of the time, bottom units first. And I'm going to go back up to here. Find your what are called equalities. Okay? And then, above all, if you're not good at this, practice. Really helpful stuff. Okay? So those are the main rules. But the basic idea, it's always helpful to start with something you know. So if you said, well, there's 18.3 hours in a day, right? Or 18.3 hours. I want to know how many days that is, or I want to know how many minutes, or whatever. Let's convert that to minutes. Okay. Now that'll be an easy one, and you'll see why. Because you're just going to multiply. But before we do that, let's assume we don't have a clue as to how to do it. So what you do is you list your equalities. Now you're not going to make it look like this every time, because you'll know these things in your head. But you know that we need purple, right? Yes, okay. So that you know that 1 hour equals 60 minutes, and vice versa. You know that there's 24 hours in a day. That might be helpful. Okay. That's probably all we need. Okay. So what you do is you start here 18.3 hours. Now we're going to color code this. This is what I mean by always put the bottom units first. This guy you want to get rid of. And so the way you do that is you have something with hours on the bottom. And then what you want goes over what you have when it comes to conversion factors. Okay? What you want is minutes on the top. What you already have is hours. We'll draw it here and you'll see why. Okay? Because now you can say, well, I know there's 1 hour. Don't worry about this plural. Hour, hours, doesn't matter. But on the top, we're going to say, well, there's 60 minutes. Okay? And then what you actively do, cross it out the same way. So whatever 18.3 times 60 is, I'm not too worried about that, but it turns out to be 498 minutes. And we got to keep the color. 498 minutes. This is as simple as it gets. Okay? But just notice how the blue things canceled out. Okay? Well, if you go the other way, okay, and let's say that you have 3,218 minutes, and you want to know how many hours that is. Again, just, you don't do this every time, but you would say, well, 1 hour equals 60 minutes. And then you could, if you wanted to, you could talk about days and hours, but you don't need that. How do we do it? Start with what you know. 3218. And this is everything's about this. Get those first units on the bottom. Okay? So they're minutes. And you know that you have 60 minutes. And then on the top, you have 1 hour. Now, remember I told you that this is 1. Well, it is, because when something is equal to something else, that's 1. For example, if you had 2 times 12 on top of 24, that's 1. They just look different, but it's 1. Okay, so that's an equality, and we're really just changing the units, but not changing the amount of stuff. Here we go. Minutes cancel out. So what are you left with? Hours. Okay, so now it's 3218 divided by 60. Boom, 53.6. And that should be in blue. Now, I'm not going to talk about significant figures, but 53.6, okay? But let's make it a little more complicated. Okay, we should look at what happens when you have a bigger stretch. So for this one, we definitely need yellow. Okay, if you have 1.73 days, and who doesn't, right? How do you convert that into seconds? Okay, well, that's not hard because it's going to be all multiplying. All of it's going to be multiplying. Okay, but since you're learning, you look at a couple of things. 1 day, 24 hours. 1 hour, 60 minutes. 1 minute, 60 seconds. Okay? This will be an easy one though because you're just multiplying. How do you start? Go back to yellow. 1.73 days. We'll just use the letter D. Okay? What's the rule? Got to get days started first. Okay? Because you know they're going to cancel. Then you look at your equality. Right? So do that. You look at your equality. Days to hours. You can do that. So the days to hours becomes 1 day. And then we're going to choose this reddish color. So you have 24 hours. Okay? Same thing happens. Hours on the bottom. Okay? So now you have 1 hour on the bottom. As messy as it is, you have 1 hour. And then what goes on top? 60 minutes. Right? And then what happens? Same thing. You got to get rid of minutes. So you put 1 minute on the bottom. Right? You're multiplying. And that's equal to 60 seconds. Okay? So I don't normally do all this, but why not? 1.73 times 24 times 60 times 60. 149. 149. Doesn't matter. Because what we're learning is how to convert. We're not worried about calculator numbers. Okay. But let's go back and actively cancel. Days canceled. Hours canceled. Minutes canceled. Okay. There you go. You're left with that. What gets a little more tricky though is when you go the other way. For example, if you had like 1 billion seconds or something like that, we could do that. Okay. So what if we had 987,000 seconds? And the question is, how many days does that equal? Well, this will be different because you're going to be dividing. It just doesn't look like dividing, but it will be. So you will need your calculators. Here we go with yellow. So 987 seconds. Okay. I'm not going to write down the equalities here, but remember, seconds go here first. And then you know that there's 60 seconds. And then 1 minute. right? So hopefully you're starting to see now. You're going to put 1 minute on, nope. You're then going to say 60 minutes in 1 hour, and then 24 hours, and then in the top is 1 day. Okay, but remember this, right? Those are actively canceling out. Seconds are gone. Minutes are gone. Hours. Okay, you're left with days. But how do you put this in your calculator? Because that sometimes is a problem. Okay, there's a couple ways you can do it. Okay, you could take 987,000, divide by, this is where you need the quantity button. Okay, look for that guy. Do all of your math. 60 times 60 times 24, right? We'll just make that a box. Then close the quantity, and then you have to use the equal sign. Okay, you could do that. And what do we get? 987,23 divide by 11.4 days. That's a lot. 11.4 days. Okay, here's where people mess up. Here's the wrong way to do it. So let's make sure we point that out in red. This, I mean, don't do it this way. It doesn't always work, so you shouldn't do this. 987,000, and then they divide by 60, then divide by 60, then divide by 24. And sometimes you get some really weird answers. The key to this problem is right here. Do that. Learn that this is a quantity. Your calculator wants to know, what do you want to divide 987,000 by? You say this whole thing. Okay, this whole thing. You could use this method, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, what you do is you enter 987,000. Okay, you divide by, I think the first one we had was 60, right? You divide by 60, you equal it out, and you get a number, A, right? Then take whatever's in your calculator, divide by 60 again, equal it out, you get B. Then whatever's B is, divide by 24, and that'll give you your 11.4 days. Okay, you should be able to do that. Okay, so that is a basic idea about how to do conversion factors, but we could try some more if you want. Okay, especially if you're doing chemistry, for example. I have something called calcium on the periodic table, and it says if I have 1 mole, 1 unit of that stuff, 1 unit of calcium weighs 40.08 grams. Okay, I could say that also for sodium. Sodium is a little bit smaller. He has 22.98 grams. You could put that on your periodic table. It says 1 mole, 1 unit equals 22.98 grams. So let's just say a mole is like a dozen or some collection. They always have the same number of things. But for calcium, when you have that, it's 40 grams. Sodium is smaller, so it's 22.98. What if I had, for example, 0.74 moles? And the reason we're doing this is because even if you don't know what moles are, you still do this because you know conversion factors. So how many grams of calcium do you have? Get that guy out of the way. Clean up. Here we go. All you do is you say 0.74 moles of calcium. And you have 1 mole of calcium, right? That's a conversion factor. weighs 40 grams. Okay, so whatever that number is, it's about 28. So we'll call it 28.3 or something like that. Okay, that's all you do. But what if you had 80, let's say 89.1 grams of sodium? How many moles? Whatever moles are, doesn't matter. How many units, how many lumps, how many boxes? We know that one box weighs 22.98, or one lump. We could say that, 1 unit. The idea is conversion factor here. Okay, you just do the same thing. 89.1 grams of sodium. Remember the rule. These got to be the same. Okay, multiply. 22.98 grams of sodium. Then on the top is 1 unit, 1 lump, 1 box. We don't care. Actively cross out, just like here, moles canceled. Grams. Okay, so this number comes out to 2346.92, so it's just about 3.82 or close to it. I'm not using a calculator. That's how many grams of sodium you would have. That's the basic idea about how to do conversion factors.